Okay, sorry, I don't have like the audio.
No worries, it's all good.
So my first question is, this is kind of an obvious question, but like I've interviewed other people. So like, what is your level of education currently?
I am working on my doctorate, so I have a master's in teaching and then a certificate in educational leadership.
Master in teaching. Okay. What roles in the educational field have you worked?
All of them.
Mm.
I was a teacher, classroom teacher. I was a coach for teachers. I was a counselor, principal, coach for principals, and at the district office.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
You have like a really good track record.
I have done a lot of things. I'm very old.
The perfect person to interview something. Goodness gracious. Okay. What grades have you worked with?
In the classroom teaching, I was always elementary. So started K-1-2, spent a lot of time in 4th and 5th grade, and then an administrator in elementary as well, but then coached and supported teachers and principals in all areas. And most recently, actually at the beginning and end of my teaching career, I was in a K-12 building.
A lot of focus on the young.
Yeah.
Okay. How has standardization treated you throughout your schooling?
Yeah. When I started, the Washington State standards were what we used. And they were good and they were rigorous, and we had them for science and math and English, PE and art. And since then, we've added social, emotional, history, social studies. I guess that one always existed, we just didn't use it as much. And then those transitioned to Common Core.
Right.
We felt like the Washington State standards were more rigorous than Common Core, so we kept Washington State standards for some of those places where we felt that. Common Core did not come out with a science Common Core until later. The next gen science standards came out after Common Core. I was actually on the committee that worked on those. So it was hard when you had just reading and math, Common Core, and then your state standards, and then nothing in science.
Right.
So it was, especially in middle and high school, a little harder to roll out, because as a principal, you're trying to teach standards, and you have some English teachers and some math teachers who are doing Common Core, and the rest of your teachers don't have standards. So it's a hot mess. Yeah. And so we would always come up with what are those standards. And then I did my national board certification. And so that pushed me to know the standards better, know how to implement them, really dig into it. And I felt like that was really good learning around the standards. I'm also a believer that you can do formative assessments along the way to make sure people are hitting those standards. And the standardized tests that goes with standards aren't necessary for me, because I'm going to know where my students are at any given moment, just like I know where my teachers are at any given moment.
That's very interesting. Do you feel like school has prepared you for the workforce?
Yes, absolutely. I did my master's in teaching when I transitioned from marketing into education, and it felt very clinical, very hands-on, let's go, like this is what a real classroom is going to look like. And we were in a cohort, so we had our peers that we could play off of. We had great student teaching experiences, so yeah, I think it was great.
Awesome. Do you think that standardized testing has supported or failed students?
I think that in places where teachers are teaching to the test because they want to get a certain score, there's a problem. but there's a benefit in that they're teaching to something. When I first started, I was working with teachers who were teaching a dinosaur unit or teaching a Thanksgiving unit, and that had nothing to do with what we wanted kids to be able to know and be able to do, right? It was teacher bias. It was all teacher led versus this kid needs X, Y, or Z for their future. So I think through some of those lessons where a teacher is super engaged, kids can learn certain things, but they should be learning the standard things.
Right.
So I think teaching to the test, if we're teaching to the standards, is actually okay if it's getting rid of some of the stuff that was fluff or biased to begin with. And so then I look at where do we have the most inexperienced teachers? Where do we have the teachers that need the most support? And has it hurt in those environments? And I think maybe because there's not a richness of how do you do both? How do you bring in yourself and get to the standards? So I think it's a complicated answer, but I think it's done some of both.
Yeah, the baseline of the standards is good.
Right.
I agree with that because we do need, like some expectation for the students for what they should be reaching at any given level. But for me, it's like when you hone in on the standards and you don't give your students like the room to breathe and express themselves and branch out, that's where I think the problem is.
Yeah, and when I think with standards, you can get all of that in it, right? If I'm trying to teach somebody how to write a 5-paragraph essay, it can be on the topics that they're interested in. Right? Like that is a part of it. If they need to learn how to do percentages, it can be because they're selling their baseball cards and they want to make money. Right? It doesn't have to be one way. Yeah.
Okay. I know we kind of already talked about Common Core, but what are your thoughts and opinions on it as a whole?
On Common Core in general?
In general.
I think that a standard offering across the country is critical because we are a population that moves. And so I have to be able to expect that people who come to me to get a job from one place have the same skills as somebody who comes from somewhere else. That's important. And I think that for us to really address pockets of where kids are not as supported, we have to have something that we're striving to. So I do think it's a positive generally. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you see it positive.
Yeah.
But do you think that it needs any readjustment?
I think the testing part does. So I think the two need to be separate. We need to have more conversation about what the standards are. I don't think most people know. I don't think most parents know. They know their standardized tests and they think they know Common Core math, but they don't. It's all like gobbledygook to them. But if we really talked about like what we're trying to teach in Common Core math is that there's more than one way to get to an answer, which is what parents are saying to us, right? So they match. So I think there needs to be more done in what are we getting? What are we teaching kids? So people are clear about that. But I think the standards themselves are good. I don't think there's too many of them. I think you can achieve it. So
I'm gonna just throw in like a question.
Yeah.
I had done some interning at a school, specifically for a second grade class in high school. And they had rolled in a new curriculum for math specifically. And it was definitely different from the way I learned.
Yeah.
And if anything, I found it more confusing. So do you think the changing of curriculums throughout the years is beneficial for the students?
I think it can be if the teachers are invested in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think oftentimes what we see with math specifically is that teachers don't understand the math.
Right.
So they don't know where it's coming from. And we don't invest enough time in how to train the teachers on what the standards are and that the curriculum's a tool. Right? We have some places where it's like, teach the curriculum, but the curriculum is never going to be able to incorporate all the standards in the way that your students in front of you need to learn.
So this is wrapping it up.
Okay.
Just some additional things. Do you have anything you want to add, just because you've been working for so long in so many different areas and so many different students?
I think the biggest thing is that all kids can achieve the standards based on what they need. When I look at an inclusive classroom with students with behavioral, emotional, psychological, mental, physical handicaps, we can make adjustments for them. But I think where we are now is better because we're pushing all kids to their potential versus saying, no, you're going to be over here in your little box and everybody else gets to try and learn. Because those boxes have changed over time, right? They were women boxes, they were black boxes, and now they're handicap boxes, right? I don't care. Like, let's all try and learn to our own personal potential, and I think the standards help us get there. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're very
so
welcome.
much. Good content.